All right, well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Imagine Austin Speaker Series event. We're really excited that you decided to join us and spend part of your evening with us today. Tonight's event is being offered in both English and Spanish, so if you would like to access the audio in Spanish, you can use the interpretation button at the bottom of your screen and then click Spanish. Bienvenido. Para escuchar esta presentación en español, haga clic en el botón Interpretation abajo y seleccione Spanish. So my name is Natalie Betts. I'm with the City of Austin's Circular Economy Program, and I'm really delighted to have the opportunity to welcome you to our event tonight. Tonight's event is part of the Imagine Austin Speaker Series, and those are a series of talks presented annually by nationally known experts and thought leaders in subjects such as land use, mobility, social equity, the built and natural environment, and sustainability. The series at its core is an opportunity to promote and implement the Imagine Austin Comprehensive Plan through shared dialogue and mutual learning. City Council adopted the Imagine Austin Comprehensive Plan in May of 2012 and is the city's 25-year plan for the future. Today's event is sponsored by Austin Resource Recovery and is coordinated by the City of Austin's Housing and Planning Department. So here in Austin, as many of you know, we strive to be a sustainable city. And we have goals like reaching zero waste by 2040 and becoming a net zero carbon city. And in these conversations, we often talk about the health of the planet or of our environment. But the reality is that we often don't talk about the fact that these sustainable solutions can also bring us joy as human beings. It can bring us more connectivity to one another, and it can bring more well-being overall. And so the question that we're kind of exploring here tonight is, how can we build a society that reflects that potential, that is both sustainable for the earth and our planet, but that also really respects the things that matter most to us as people: friendships, well-being, and our quality of life. And that's what our speaker is going to cover. So we're really excited to have Sage Lenier with us. Sage is a 22-year-old educator who has been teaching and organizing in the environmental sphere for 4 years. She began as an undergraduate at Berkeley, teaching to her peers, and her course, Solutions for a Sustainable and Just Future, has now been taught to over 800 people. She's currently teaching with Zero Waste USA and is working on turning her curriculum into a book. A few housekeeping tips before we give Sage the floor is that everyone should be on mute. If you aren't muted, please make sure you do so we don't have interruptions. We will be taking questions at the end of tonight's event. So you can use our Q&A box at the bottom to ask those questions. Please try not to use the chat in order for your questions, because it just will make it harder for us to find your questions. So you can please use the Q&A box, that would be great. And the chat will be used for technical questions. So if you have any issues with Zoom, please share those with us in the chat. Tonight's session, as I mentioned, is offered in both English and Spanish. So you can use the interpretation button at the bottom of your screen and click Spanish if you'd like to hear the presentation in Spanish. So para escuchar esta presentación en español, haga clic en el botón Interpretación abajo y seleccione Spanish. And this session will be recorded in both languages, and it will be posted on the city's website, and it will also be sent to you and to everyone else who registered for the event. You can also turn on closed captions for this event, which you can do at the closed caption button at the bottom of your screen. I do want to note this is our program's first time using both these features in Zoom, interpretation and closed captioning. So please let us know if you're having any trouble with them. That feedback is super important to us, and you can let us know in the chat so we can help you, and then also as follow-up to the event tonight. And finally, toward the end of the talk, you're going to receive a link in the chat to an event survey, and you'll also receive that in a follow-up email. If you can spend a few minutes to fill out the survey and tell us what you thought of tonight's talk, we'd really appreciate it. It really helps us maintain this community programming, keep it improving, and make sure that it's responsive to your needs. So if you can spend a minute to fill that out, that would be great. And that survey will be available in both English and Spanish. All right, so without further ado, I'm going to hand the floor off to Sage. Go ahead and share your screen.
Thank you, Natalie, and thank you everyone for being with us here today. I'm really excited. All right, let me share my screen. And that's full screen for you all, yes? Is this full screen? Okay,
Yes.
wonderful. Hi everyone, that was a pretty succinct description of me. So I'll just go ahead and hop into it. Let me get my screen set up. Okay, so essentially today, with the circular economy, I know this is a running series, there are so many different angles to approach this conversation. So we are looking a little bit through a little bit at the access and equity standpoint. We're going to talk about our definition of wealth and what that means. That's the foot I like to start off on for these conversations. And then we're going to transition into kind of, well, what are some examples, some real life examples of the circular economy in action, and kind of just try to like tease out a mental image of what living in a circular economy would look like. And we're going to finish off with a discussion of actually degrowth, which is usually people kind of see that as the antithesis of, or maybe like two separate ideas that compete, the circular economy and degrowth, but kind of talk about how they have to happen in tandem in order for us to get to our sustainability goals. So here we are. So presently, we have 7.8 billion people on the planet, right? And that only keeps going up. We're expecting to peak around 10 billion or 11 billion at the end of the century. But already we are using 1.6 times more resources than the Earth can sustain. If you've all heard of Earth Overshoot Day, that happens in about August each year. Earth Overshoot Day being, sorry, there are some birds twittering outside my the room I'm in, so hopefully you can't hear that, or hopefully it's not too distracting. So Earth Overshoot Day being the day that we have officially exhausted all of the resources that the Earth can sustainably provide us in a year. And after that point, we are in a deficit. We are basically stealing from future generations or future years, right? So that happens in August. We are using 1.6 times too many resources. So given that, we're expecting this huge population increase, and we are also already using too many resources, we're faced with these really hard, pressing questions about how we can go about lessening existing inequality. There is, still a tremendous amount of poverty, hunger in our world, even though we are using such an overabundance of resources, and also how to scale back our environmental footprint and do those two things simultaneously, addressing inequality and scaling back. So we're trying to craft this vision for what a better future could look like, and we're turning to the concept of a circular economy, where planetary and human well-being are no longer at odds, ideally. So let's jump into it. What is wealth? So I can't take credit for this concept, but I mean, who really can take credit for concepts? We all build off of one another. This is Chris Martinson in his book, The Crash Course. This is where I was first introduced to this topic, and I don't think anyone has ever said it better than he has, or framed the argument better. So I always try to give credit and reference the original argument that is made here about our definition of wealth. Okay, so Chris Martinson, he is in this book. He's driving through different towns on the East Coast and noticing the different types of trees in poorer communities versus richer communities. And he's noticing that there are a lot of pine trees, which usually grow in weak sandy soils in the poorer communities. In wealthier areas, there's always an abundance of maple trees, which require really rich soil in order to survive. And he's realizing, as he's seeing the poor communities and the smaller buildings and the less extravagance, the more rundown buildings and whatnot, the more rundown communities, that there is really, especially on the East Coast with such a longer history, 300 years or so, than we do over on the West Coast, that historically speaking, the wealth of your soil has always been intrinsically tied to the wealth of you, right? That's the meaning behind that phrase, dirt poor. You are literally only as rich as your soil. So for our ancestors, this idea was obviously just undeniable. It was obvious that when your life and your livelihood depends on agriculture, if your soil is poor, you are poor too, right? If no matter how much work you put into low nutrient soil, you're not going to get more product out of it. But if you have really, really healthy, rich soil, you are going to be rich in the amount of product, the amount of food that you're able to supply yourself with, right? So there we introduce the concept of a hierarchy of wealth. Primary wealth is our natural resource base. You have rich soil, concentrated ores of metal, coal, you have oil, freshwater, abundant fisheries, these things basically as they exist in nature. And the more concentrated that wealth is, the easier the task is of creating secondary wealth, which is basically the wealth that we use, the things that benefit us truly. So that's when ore becomes steel. That's when fish leads to, a stream full of fish turns into dinner on the table, trees, lumber, or paper, etc. So the more rich that primary source is, the easier it is for you to extract wealth from that, right? But they are intrinsically tied, the primary and secondary wealth. You can only have so much secondary wealth as you do primary. The third kind of wealth is our understanding of wealth, and that is all the paper and digital abstractions that we're layering on top of the first two sources. That's paper money, that's gold, that's derivatives, stocks, bonds. These are a claim on the other two forms of wealth, but it is not wealth itself, right? Third order wealth has no true value. It has no meaning. It's something that we are all socially agreeing upon has value, but in reality, you cannot eat your contracts. You cannot use your stocks to keep you warm in the wintertime. So tertiary wealth, the thing that we have all come to prioritize and understand as security, is really actually this abstract thing that only it can exist so long as we have abundant primary wealth, right? So that concept is challenging the fundamental ideologies upon which our current economy is built on, our global capitalist system and our society and our cultural values, which are that resources exist to be exploited for financial gain, and that financial gain will bring prosperity and security. If the resources are the wealth themselves and we degrade them in order to have monetary value, what value can monetary wealth have when all available planetary resources have been lost in any useful capacity? So clearly, we have all been tricked into pursuing the wrong kind of wealth. So the question that remains is how we can go about reprioritizing our economy and our social values to be focused on becoming wealthy in ways that will ensure we have enough food to eat, enough electricity to keep ourselves warm or cool, and enough forests to ensure that we have clean air to breathe. Financial security, if you will. So the circular economy. I think this slide is in the wrong place. That was supposed to be up at the front, but no matter. Just a quick look at population growth over time and how we can really see, how fast things are happening. I'm sure many of you have heard of that J curve, this exponential growth here. It took us, estimates vary, but it took us about 200,000 years to reach the first, that's a million. Isn't that supposed to be billion? 200,000, okay. I'm reading this wrong. It took us about 200,000 years to reach the first billion people. But since then, it took only about 30 or 130 years to reach the second billion, 30 years for the third. And ever since, we've been adding a billion people to our population every 13 to 16 years. So, we have never seen a population like this on our planet. We really don't know what our planet's limit is. And in planning for the future, we kind of have to constantly keep this population growth at the forefront of our minds. So looking at the current state of our economy and our resource consumption, Americans represent this is actually an outdated number. It's actually closer to 5% of the world's population. but we use 12% of the world's resources in this country. Comparatively, less developed countries that comprise 83% of the world's population use just 30% of the world's resources. So obviously, neither of these are sustainable. We have to consume less, us and other developed or wealthy nations, and the people at the bottom of the world's financial tier have to consume more because we do have about 3.5 billion people, almost half of our population, living in poverty. There's still several billion people who don't have consistent access to electricity, which is something that's come to be seen as a human right in the modern era. So we're asking, how do we accommodate this change? We'll talk about that a little more with degrowth. So what is it that we're all using in America? Well, let's take a look. These are some of my favorite headlines to curate and to research. So food waste, Americans throw away nearly half their food. $16 billion worth of Christmas gifts annually. The average office worker, 10,000 sheets of paper, 500 million plastic straws a day. 91% of plastic not being recycled. The US uses 11 times more energy than the UK, even though we only have 5 times more people. 9.8 million tons of furniture per year. So, in all honesty, I would say, though, when you look at these headlines, so much of this waste that's having such a disproportionate impact on our planet is so peripheral to us. We don't even realize that we are using the vast majority of these resources, and they don't make a difference to us. None of us feel wonderful about the use of a sheet of paper or a plastic straw. None of us really feel that really enriches our lives, but we're using these things so peripherally just because that's our culture. And it's really not benefiting us, but it is damaging the planet and making those resources inaccessible to people who genuinely need them. So a lot of what a lot of what the changes we need to make with transitioning towards a circular economy or transitioning towards degrowth is simply using less, right? So much of this is not useful to us, not important to us, not really benefiting our lives. We are running this linear system of extraction, production, distribution, consumption, disposal, but we live on a planet with finite resources, right? You cannot run that system indefinitely. Too often we're looking at the economy and we're seeing that as just one small piece of the economy or the environment as one small piece of the economy, almost an afterthought. But it's not just one little thing, it's what the entire economy and what our lives really depend on, what the economy is based on. So we need to reframe that understanding of economics. So that all being said, 1 second, just trying to find my notes here. Oh, I think this one is in the wrong, oh no, I have this in 2 different places. I'm actually gonna skip this and I'm gonna come back to it because I do have it in another spot. So okay, I'm gonna move a little forward for the sake of time. So the circular economy, I'm sure that some of you are very familiar with this, but just a little refresh for those who are in the room and maybe new to the topic, is really not as tricky as it sounds. You start really just with the simple act of transitioning towards paying for spending money on experiences and services rather than the fixation on goods, consuming goods. So some examples of services rather than goods is basically repairing clothing instead of going shopping, right? Built to last, and then you have money being transferred in that repair service. Renting books or tools from a library instead of buying them, things like that. Maybe you pay a fee for the rental, maybe it's free. Instead of gifts that are physical, that are tangible, you are more so doing things like piano lessons, sewing workshop. You do dinner instead of trinkets and flowers to show your affection for someone you care about. Experiences, concerts, theaters, museums, hiking, laser tags. It's really more focused on enjoying life than owning things and shopping. Pretty simple if you frame it that way. So there's a few different models that we can use to go about achieving this. And you have returns to the earth, rental, ownership, and then repair. So these are a couple of really interesting case studies. So Ecovative is a company that has designed a form of packaging that is grown by mushrooms, and there's a variety of companies doing this research. I'm not like affiliated with or sponsored by any of these folks. I just like to use real life examples. So, for the instances where you really can't just get rid of packaging, say something's fragile and you want to ship it like a mirror or something like that, and you need to ship with packaging, swapping out our traditional plastic petroleum byproduct packaging for mycelium, mushrooms, things like that, which can just literally be thrown outside and they will break down at their end of life, is one of these ways where we can institute more circular systems. Rental ownership. So this is actually a really interesting example. So here you have lights, but I've also seen this proposed with things like cars, and I'll talk about in a second, or dishwashers, where rather than you're paying, in this example, for light bulbs, you are literally only paying for the light itself, and the company is responsible for the maintenance of the physical fixtures and for taking back the light bulbs or the fixtures at their end of life and making sure that all of their parts are being reused properly. A wonderful example. And repair. So Patagonia is known for many things, particularly being very expensive, but also for having a very, very robust repair program where you can take your, if you rip something or burn it or whatever, you can take your clothing to them and they will do their very best to repair it. And they have a really robust program in place for that. And so, we're starting to see these things in action in more irregular places, such as Levi's, or you're seeing this in your average American mall. These kind of tailor shops are more like focused on like customization and like patches and things like that, but you can take your jeans to them and get your jeans repaired, which is wonderful and a drastic change from the tailoring industry has been on a steady decline for the past several decades, and it's looking like these skills are becoming more and more in demand as people want higher quality clothes or more customized, or just the ability to fix their own belongings. So some other examples of the sharing economy. There's some wonderful examples of this in real life action. So kind of like thinking of underutilized resources such as tools. The average power drill is only used for, I think, 15 minutes of its life. So rather than having, individual ownership, every house in America has its own toolbox, that kind of, extravagance that we're not really thinking about, but is obviously having real implications on the amount of metal we're mining and things like that. Sorry if the chat has anything to do with me. I can't see the chat. I do see that like the notifications are going up. I'll try and talk slower if that's what the messages are about. So sharing economy would just look like simply having a community tool library where we can go and check out tools when we need them, rather than each of us having our own sets. So it can also look like some really cool new innovative models. So I use the example of Gig, which is a company located in Berkeley and Seattle, I want to say. And there's a few other companies like this that are popping up around the US. I think Austin might have one actually. So Gig is a instant car rental. I loved using this my senior year of college. I literally just had the app on my phone, as you can see, and it shows you a map of all of the cars nearby you, and you can just reserve one, walk over to it. You get in the car, they're Priuses, they're very fuel efficient. You drive it, it charges you by the minute, so you have an incentive to drive less, right? And then you drop it off anywhere within the designated zone and you're done. I loved the concept of this. For me, this alleviated any need for me to own a car. All of the inconveniences that I had prior to Gig being widespread in Berkeley, that I was like, dang, I really wish I had a car, just completely disappeared once I had access to this service. And I was basically sharing a fleet of cars with several thousand other people, only about 500 cars for, I think, I looked at their numbers, they had about 50,000 people signed up for the service in the Bay Area. And that's an incredible model for looking at how, the United States has this built infrastructure for streets and for cars and not so much for walking or public transit. So maybe systems like gig could incentivize us to share more, to drive less, and also to use our existing infrastructure. So very interesting. 12:30. It's 12:30 in my time zone. So I think I've got time for this. So kind of running through a few more examples of this, just because I heard that the feedback from your last circular economy talk was that there was a preference for more real life applications. Kind of very similar to actually how gig works. I love this example of having solved the cup problem. So we do know that I think, gosh, I don't think I have the numbers in front of me. 6 billion. So Starbucks, for example, Starbucks alone, out of all the coffee companies in the United States, throws away 6 billion cups, paper cups a year. But the problem with these cups is that they are not recyclable. They are paper lined with a layer of polyethylene. So that's a plastic. And obviously, when you get paper wet, it melts. So they add in that plastic lining to make sure that your hot coffee is not going to melt the cup. So since they are mixed paper and plastic, they can't be recycled. And this is a huge waste of resources, especially because the United States is very strict standards for food safety, meaning that coffee cups have to be made of virgin paper. So we are just cutting down forests for Starbucks and for Pete's and Dunkin' and all of the different coffee companies in America. And coffee is not even a real essential. I know some of y'all will argue with me on that, but coffee is not a real essential. And this is a huge luxury that we are able to waste so many coffee cups. So we have a real problem to solve here, right? So we're looking at some different solutions and we're like, oh, what if we make them compostable? Okay, well, compostable cups would cost more, and the United States doesn't have an infrastructure for composting nationwide. We only have 200 composting facilities in the whole United States. Plus, it's still a linear system where you're extracting resources, you're cutting down trees, and you're sending them to a compost rather than a landfill. You could technically recycle them, but it is very expensive to do it. There's a link there if anyone is interested. I'll share my slides afterwards. It was proven that they could be recycled, but it is very expensive to do it. Or you could incentivize people to bring their own cups. Well, Starbucks already does that. Maybe they could try raising the financial incentive above 10 cents. Maybe they could make that 25 or even 50 cents. But the fact of the matter is, the majority of people don't bring their own cups. So I was researching this and I was like, what could be the possible solution? And I was thinking, like, what about a reusable cup that's like, you can check it out and drop it off? And I found this one city in Germany, Freiburg, that was doing this with a little plastic cup. And I thought I had a slide in here on it, but I don't. They could pay a euro deposit for the cup and then return it to any of the 100 stores in the city center that were participating. And then the stores would disinfect and reuse the cups hundreds of times. And I thought that this was such a wonderful, wonderful idea that was just happening in Germany. And I was like, this is so cool. I wish we could bring that. And then one of my students that semester that I was teaching this concept messaged me or sent me an email later and was like, I can't stop thinking about that cup idea for a business. We should do that here in Berkeley. And then I was like, too late. Someone already did it. And that summer, Vessel came to Berkeley. I've met the founder of Vessel. She's very nice, and I'm not mad at her for stealing my idea because I could have made so much money. No, I'm kidding. But Vessel came to the city that I was living in just as I was teaching this concept, and it was crazy, really, to have that. I was really excited about the idea of this concept. So Vessel was stationed at all of these different cafes around campus and throughout the city of Berkeley, and you could check out a cup with your phone and get your coffee in it, and then I could drop it off at any of those participating locations. And that is a wonderful example of how the circular economy can exist next to us or with us. So all this talk of these wonderful ideas for what exciting new sustainable business models could look like and what our cool futuristic sharing models could be. But at the end of the day, we have to face the facts. No country is currently meeting the basic needs of its citizens while also operating within the physical boundaries of our planet. We're looking at a map of ecological footprint and human development. Basically, human development tries to track the health, wellness, and happiness. Those are obviously difficult to track, but this is run by global footprint networks and, oh no, this is mapped by global footprint network, and the UN provided this data. So I think it's like as close as we're going to get for a measurement of health, wellness, and happiness. So here we have health, wellness, and happiness. Sorry, haven't been doing this much talking for this amount of time in a while. I'm out of practice with lecturing. And then the number of Earths that would be required if that country was the whole world, right? Like how many Earths do they take up in terms of their resource conservation? And so this is the Global Sustainable Development Quadrant. No one's there, unfortunately. So we all have goals. We need to get these. I think y'all can see my mouse moving, but we need to get largely African and Asian countries over here towards more resource use and higher development quadrant. And then these countries here that are using way too many Earths, but don't even have high enough wellness or happiness. I mean, wait, no, they do. They do, but they're using way too many Earths, need to go down in their resource consumption while hopefully not curbing their citizens' quality of life in any way. So, that there's huge challenges in squishing everyone into that box down there. And in the process of, or when we're trying to realistically plan for that, we find ourselves looking at things like degrowth. Because, as I talked about earlier, much of the reason that we are headed towards climate and ecological collapse can be attributed to overconsumption. It all goes back to overconsumption. Our constant demand for new and more goods requires taking increasingly more resources from the planet and giving back pollution, greenhouse gases, and waste. Consumerism is the vehicle through which capitalism keeps itself alive, right? It being that capitalism is a system that requires constant growth. The global economy is today almost 5 times the size it was 50 years ago, but this growth has been accompanied by the degradation of 60% of the world's ecosystems. So our planet is completely at odds with our economic system. In order to keep humanity alive, we are going to have to drastically pivot our economy towards one that can coexist with the Earth that sustains us. So degrowth, looking at degrowth, is a planned, coherent policy intended to be, right? This is purely theoretical because it hasn't been accomplished on any large scale, but this is something we should all be keeping our eyes on and hopefully working towards from a policy and cultural standpoint. So degrowth would be a planned coherent policy of decreasing global consumption and production with the coupled goal of reducing inequality and humanity's ecological impact. So in the process of doing this, you are working towards to improve social safety nets and employment. So policies that are frequently cited in degrowth as working towards this would be shortening the work week, introducing a job guarantee with a living wage, seeking to expand universal public goods and services, health, education, transportation, food, housing, in order to really decommodify the foundational goods that people need in order to lead flourishing lives. Not making a profit off of the real essential services that keep us all going and allow us choice and wellness and a high quality of life would go a long way towards enacting the rest of the degrowth policies. So the concept of degrowth really targets the world's wealthiest. The richest 10% of the planet produce half the world's individual consumption-based fossil fuel emissions, while the poorest 50% of the world contribute only 10%. So what we're seeing with that, or what that really means, is that, as I said earlier, many people in poverty still need to increase their resource and energy use in order to meet basic human needs and improve their quality of life. So by specifically focusing on high income countries, communities, and individuals that are consuming more than their sustainable share of Earth's resources, we target excess consumption, not consumption overall, because consumption is not inherently a bad thing. So we are looking at, through policy and cultural change, trying to drastically reduce or eliminate sectors that do the most ecological damage. That's going to be mass meat production, CAFOs, fast fashion, expedited shipping, cheap commercial flights, for examples. We're looking at really the vital shift in our social values away from valuing unsustainable commodities. Degrowth would hopefully allow us to relocalize our economies, freeing us from the confines of modern consumerism, and create more resilient communities in the face of our rapidly changing climate. So wherever possible, we are looking at growing our own food, turning our neighborhoods into edible landscapes. We have a picture of a victory garden instead of a lawn here. Degrowth would ideally open the door for the expansion of new and reimagined industries with products, like in the circular economy, that have neither negative nor positive impacts on the planet, like green energy, craftsmanship and repair, education, entertainment, agriculture, environmental stewardship, jobs that purely exist to restore ecosystems, to plant trees or moss or shrubs or what have you. So degrowth, coupled with the circular economy, offers a more humble and arguably more realistic vision of a sustainable future. So, oh, I've reached the end of my notes. That was funny. Arguably more realistic vision of a sustainable future. That was supposed to be my grandiose final line, but I guess I thought I had more to say. All right, so I would like to take this time to open for discussion. Let's see.
We do have one question in the Q&A box so far, and please, everyone, feel free to put more questions in the Q&A box, and we will get them answered for you. So, Sage, the one we have is, which countries are closest to the global development quadrant?
It's a wonderful question. Okay, so we only have mapped by geographic region here. And gosh, we have a lot of Central America and the Caribbean here. And I know that it's been a minute since I looked at this data, but I have a feeling that Cuba is over here. That might not be correct. Or was it Colombia? I don't have an exact list. I could pull up the data, or you could look at that on your own, but it is interesting that it is a lot of the Middle East, a lot of Central Asia, a lot of Central America and the Caribbean that is, closest to this index. So this is, this group here is almost in the quadrant. And you also see actually certain African countries. You see very little of Europe, and I don't think North America. Yeah, North America is over here. So you see very little of Europe. So actually, the real thought leaders and the real examples that we should be turning to in order to emulate how we can live abundantly with a lower environmental impact, we should really be turning to the expertise of Central American, Middle Eastern, Caribbean, Central Asian countries to see, how are they doing better than us? What are they doing right? Why are their citizens happy or have a higher quality of life than us, but are living with less? So yeah, That's a good question. That's a great spot to interrogate.
And I think that we just put in the chat a link to some more information about on this footprint network. So hopefully that will have more details on which specific countries. We did have one question. I think you said you'd be willing to share your slides, correct, Sage?
Yes, I'll drop a link. Sorry, I don't know if y'all can hear that motorcycle gunning. Wonderful. So I can drop a link in the chat and also probably send that out later.
Perfect. Yeah, we can send it out with the follow-up email that everyone will receive.
Let me just make this shareable. Okay, there's a couple things I'd like to address in there actually. Oh, go ahead.
In the Q&A box, do you want to go ahead?
Yeah.
Okay, sure.
One moment. Let me just make these slides shareable so that y'all can access. Okay, now if you click on the link in the chat, you should be able to see the slides. Zero population growth, the elephant in the room. Yes, that is something I am a huge proponent of. That is a whole nother like hour-long lecture to give though, and the one that I actually just gave for Santa Clara University. That was a really fun talk that we had to talk, basically, how do we achieve a lower population growth rate ethically? Like without eugenics or like one-child policies or anything like that. And you basically, we can achieve a drastically reduced population with simply furthering family planning services, education around family planning, birth control, and K through 12 education for mostly women or people who can give birth. So you see globally a huge disparity in the education level of people who can give birth versus their the amount of children that they have. And so what we're finding is on average, the difference between a person who can give birth with 0 years and 12 years of education is on average 4 to 5 children. So you see that people are self-selecting with more education, whether that's because they have decided they want fewer children or because they before wouldn't have had the agency to say no to having that many children. So you see people self-selecting for lower population growth, but that is like a whole nother conversation. And so I just didn't include that here because it's not, immediately related to the circular economy, but it is something that I am very passionate about and a huge advocate for.
And so just so you know, our audience, I don't think can always see all our questions, so we should probably read them out. But do you want to take the one about the pandemic?
Let's see.
There's a question of, what impact do you think the pandemic has had on the circular economy? And do you think any changes or mind shifts that have happened during this time will be long-term?
You could say that it has both advanced and setback initiatives to move towards a more circular economy. For example, people are a little more afraid of sharing, especially towards the beginning of the pandemic when we really didn't know, like, can it live on plastic? Can it live on surfaces? So, things like Vassal or Gig, like who wanted to share a car with other people at the beginning of the pandemic? I mean, for those of us who didn't have a car, it actually was a really useful service, and they upped their cleaning processes to be like daily, and then I would just go in and wipe everything down and whatnot. But for me, getting groceries, because I didn't want to get on a bus, that was a wonderful option to have. Alternatively, so just as you've seen, Starbucks stop taking reusable cups, so that's kind of a setback. You've seen quite a few advances, and I would say that those advancements largely come from this kind of organized chaos that is mutual aid networks. We've seen mutual aid networks pop up all over the United States in the past year. And there's over 800 of them now in the US, and it's beautiful to see because it is really a radical attempt at community building and helping out your neighbor and really like sharing resources, sharing sharing the things that we own, sharing our skills, etc. So you have seen that through people providing pro bono mental health services in their community, or picking up groceries for elderly neighbors. But you also see more things along the lines of, sharing Wi-Fi, sharing tools, things like that, that has really come about through the advent and expansion of these mutual aid networks. So I would say, I don't think that the community care that we have begun to establish is going to go away.
That's great. We also have two questions about degrowth applying locally. So one asking if there's any cities leading the way for degrowth, and also how do we apply degrowth to not just consumption, but production policies locally?
Cities leading the way towards degrowth. It is hard to say. Any city that is leading the way towards more sustainable initiatives could probably be said as leading the way towards degrowth. One way to do it is by, I was just reading a case study and I forgot the name of the city, but there's a small town in California that banned all chain businesses from operating in their borders, which is very interesting because not only do you cut out fast food, but you're also cutting out chain retailers, clothing retailers and whatnot. You're supporting your local economy and your local, artisans and things like that. So I think that a lot of what we today understand as like sustainability or like support small businesses is in a way that attempt at relocalizing our economies, that attempt at slowing our consumption that really ultimately exists under the umbrella of degrowth. Arcata, that wasn't the one, someone in the chat to panelists said Arcata CA, that wasn't the one that I was looking at. It was a 2-word, it was like, I think it was like Los something. It was a 2-word city, or a 2-word little small town. So that was an interesting case study. The other question, sorry, what was the other question that you asked about?
Sure, yeah, the other question was, I guess it's sort of a 2-part one, but how do we apply it to not only consumption, but production? And how can it be applied locally? So we kind of addressed that first one, but
yeah. So I love this. So yeah, obviously you are going to be introducing kind of trying to push a cultural change to not value this consumption. And you're also probably going to doing like on the like political level, you're going to do like bans or taxes on these really high resource use or very unnecessary industries. And we're starting to see that with things like plastic bags and stuff like that, or, California creating incentives for lower or high, more fuel efficient vehicles and things like that. But on the production level, you're probably, as a business, you're going to be looking at kind of shifting your own model and methods of, sorry, there's a really loud truck going by right now.
It's okay.
Right, very loud. So you're going to be looking at trying to shift your own production and your own ways of making money away from selling more units and more towards repairing your own products. So you're going to be like shifting towards like maybe, so say you're a phone manufacturer, you want to do modular phones. So instead of trying to get people to buy as many iPhones as you possibly can by either being like, ooh, look, this new model, or by being like, hey, your phone stopped working, within 2 years, so you got to go get a new one because they've designed it that way. Then they're looking at, okay, gosh, we're having a parade. Then we're looking more so at like, how do we incentivize customers to come to us for their repairs rather than going to another business? So you want to be cost competitive and you want to have a really robust and really easy to repair model, or you want to just release like a new piece each year. Like say if you go for a modular phone, you can take those apart really easily. So you would be like, we've upgraded the camera, and everyone's like, oh my God, I want to like a higher quality camera. So instead of replacing the whole phone, you're just replacing that one module. So, on the production level, there's a lot of different ways to intervene. It mostly looks like having longer lasting products, really easy to repair products, focusing your income streams on either repair or maybe like that rent model. So like you're only selling them the light, like the light itself, but not the light bulb. And so you can charge them annually or something like that. So there's a lot of different modes of intervention in the production level. Sorry, that was a long-winded answer.
No, that's great. Thank you. There's also a question about convincing people. So just saying, how do we change people's way that they buy, and how do we convince them to scale back?
Okay, I see that question. Really, like, it sounds complicated, but I always just kind of start with like, you just make it cool. I mean, I saw the stark contrast in like growing up in Southern California, where there is there are a lot of people moving into Southern California who are hyper fixated on consumption. And there's like this, like young, there's this bubble of like 20s and 30-year-olds who are, or 20s and 30s, people who are really focused on moving to California and having a good time. And it's really like hyper fixated on, having the look and having the experiences and, wearing the clothes and stuff. And then in NorCal, it's so much more relaxed. There's not that culture at all. And so growing up in SoCal and then going to school in NorCal, I saw the culture change. And I changed to adapt with the culture. And it was interesting to see the way that it was almost like social pressure. Other people kind of pushing like, this is cool. I mean, it's kind of like it's becoming more and more mainstream to be like, oh, thrifting is cool. Or having having one water bottle with you all the time that you use for years is cool. Like kind of like the social shift from like, ew, like cow's milk is gross, use oat milk, that kind of like social pressure almost, where you just make it cool to wear old fashioned, like out of style clothes, or to refurbish, or to, I think that people who know how to sew are like the coolest people on the planet right now. And every time they show up on my TikTok feed or my YouTube, I'm like, oh, you're so cool. So kind of, it really is like this cultural shift, and it doesn't have to be led by like big publications and big news outlets. It really can be more of something that we in our everyday lives try to steward, and just influence the people around us in this kind of haphazard way to be like, of a different mindset, that it's cool to consume less.
Awesome. And then there's a question about how energy consumption, so electricity, gas, etc., fit into the circular economy model.
Okay. Love this question, but I feel like I'm not the authority on this. So I'm going to mind my business and stay in my lane. And rather than giving you a long, convoluted answer, I'm not like an energy expert. I do like to talk about decarbonization. There are a variety of interventions to like the climate crisis that are not just solar panels or renewable energy. But I don't feel like I have a real grasp on how it fits into the circular economy specifically. So I'm gonna have to reference you out. I'm sorry.
All right. Well, I think, let's see, we do have just one other kind of question comment that says that this sounds a lot like ecological economics. Does that concept tie into circular economy? That's something you're familiar with?
I have heard of the field of ecological economics. I've actually not read anything for Herman Daly, but I will give that a look-sees. I'm always looking for new resources and influences and whatnot. So I just put that in put his name in a tab I've heard of, but haven't actually really had the time to sit down and engage with that. So thanks for that reminder. I will take a look. But yeah, I mean, they are like, I think that the concept of the circular economy really developed out of the original research that people have been doing on ecological economics since the 40s, the 30s, I think. So, you know, all of these things, like I said, like who is really the originator of any like thought? We all really build off of each other. And this concept has been kind of growing out of this understanding that we are consuming too much for so long. And I think even in the past 4 years, the concept of the circular economy or environmental economics has drastically transformed. And that's, you know, as our technologies change and as our culture changes to be more interested. I mean, like climate change was hardly a conversation 5 years ago. So, or resource extraction is really not, resource overconsumption is really not even a conversation yet. So there's wonderful new places to interrogate every day. Yeah.
And I think we just have one other question, kind of for like a follow-up email maybe, and we can put this in the chat, but someone was just interested in learning more about the research behind the connection to the number of children and education level. So we can maybe follow up afterwards.
Yeah, I actually do have like a, okay. Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Didn't interrupt you.
No, go.
Were you done?
I was done.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. I actually do have a few different like PowerPoints, and I think I've got like, I made a nice little Instagram post. I don't think my Instagram is active right now. I try to take long breaks from social media. I have some curated research certainly about ethical population degrowth, ethical zero population growth. So I can send that. I can send that to Natalie to send out in a follow-up email. It's one of my favorite conversations to have. It's so important that we do that, because I mean, like, even if there weren't environmental like implications for our limiting population growth, like I just think it would be so important regardless, because like everyone should have the autonomy to decide how many children they want to have. And yeah, it solves so many problems at once. I love it. Love that conversation.
Perfect. All right, well, we have one last question that came in, I think is a great kind of closing question. So besides providing your wonderful education to students and the community, what is your personal favorite step that you are taking to contribute to a circular economy? We can inspire some folks on their own personal journeys.
Oh my goodness.
Sorry, I stumped you.
No, I guess I have just recently started volunteering with my local mutual aid network. So that's one of my favorites. You know, it is wonderful to have the opportunity to kind of build back something that has been decaying for so long in America, which is community and community support. And so whether that's, you know, helping folks out with their children, or you know, doing errands for your elderly neighbors, it's really just like knowing who's in your neighborhood and who's in your community, and kind of offering support in a really radical way where you're not waiting for government intervention, but you are in this really like haphazard, messy, fun way acting as a community. And a lot of that has to do with like not consuming resources or sharing resources or what have you. So I think that's it. But I have to have an honorary mention. I love Facebook Marketplace. I love finding treasure like furniture on Facebook Marketplace. So that's my way of like thrifting through the internet, because I've kind of gotten lazy and I don't really like going to thrift stores as much since I'm no longer a teenager, I guess. And thrift store or digital thrifting on Facebook Marketplace is really a gem. That's my favorite personal way of working on it. So yeah.
Thank you all so much for joining us for this event. Thank you, Sage, for the wonderful talk and all your resources that you've shared with us. There's links in the chat for filling out our survey. So if you could all please take a few minutes and do that. Like I said at the beginning, your feedback is super important to us. We want to always hear you and improve our programming, and it helps us maintain this resource for the community. So If you could do that, that would be wonderful. We will send out an email in the next day or two with the recording, with some of the links that were mentioned today, and a reminder about the survey. So thank you all so much for being here, for spending part of your evening with us, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, everyone, and thank you, Natalie, and all the folks in Austin for hosting me. This has been fun. Thank you, everyone.